Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Okay, hi, Dr. Abernathy. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm so excited that you decided to do this podcast today. I'm happy that you're here.
Thank you. Me too. I'm so honored to be here. I'm honored, excited, and nervous.
Right? Okay. Well, let's make it happen. You and I met in an interesting way, right? We met on Instagram and we found out that we have very similar niches in terms of private practice and the clientele that we work with. And so can you just tell the people about yourself and what you do and your passion behind the work you do?
Thank you. So I am a licensed clinical psychologist here in North Carolina. I have worked over the years in community mental health and in higher education. I worked at the University of Southern California and also at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, here where I am now. In my work, I've experienced, so as an individual, I am a third generation female minister, and unfortunately, but also in an informative way, I am fourth generation survivor of family abuse. So we've had members who have survived physical abuse, spiritual, financial, emotional, and verbal. And in our work and in our experience in my work, we often see a lot of media attention to the physical aspects of violence, but we often overlook the verbal, emotional, and those things that start very early on to indicate that the person may be at risk. And so my focus is actually survivors of emotional abuse. And so that could be verbal. And there's also an aspect in the model that I have for how to reset your life after having experienced emotional abuse. There's a component that will address the financial abuse.
Wow. Yeah, that's very true. There's so many interwoven pieces in that. And it's awesome that you do what you do. And in your private practice, do you specialize in working with women or men or just anyone who's experienced that type of abuse?
Well, thank you for asking that. So at the university, I worked with, it wasn't just men or women. I often had students at times who were in toxic relationships with their parents and wanting to have tools to remain in relationship, right? Because most times they either had one parent that was already not there or emotionally available, or, how do you just come to college and throw away your parent? So it was giving them the skills to remain in the relationship, but also remain safe. In my private practice, most of the clients that I see who are survivors of family violence are women and children. When I work with children, I do provide play therapy, and depending on the developmental level of the child, there may be, quite a bit of talk therapy as well, because as we know, the language of children is play. So part of the work that I do, I'm very intentional when I work with children to also work with at least one, if not both parents, because what can happen is a trauma bond can form between the child and the parent so that they're still functioning as if they're in this survival mode instead of functioning as thriving. So I use what is called the parent-child psychotherapy model for children who have been witnesses of domestic violence. And it is very succinct. It's very clear. It is about 9 to 12 month model. Okay. And it includes it's almost like wraparound. So there are layers of care. So you're directly addressing the behaviors of the child, but then you also address the dynamics between the parent and the child. And when given the opportunity, which I had on my internship training where I worked in the therapeutic preschool, you're able to intervene and give them the skills they need to interact with their peers or their siblings. So I believe my overall philosophy for private practice or wherever I work is to really work my way out of a job, and especially with parents.
Yeah.
So a parent comes in and they feel less capable and confident of caring for their child. So I may start out modeling what I do with their child, but the entire time it's a matter of mentoring and coaching so that that parent can then do with that child and for that child what we are creating in the office. Otherwise, they go home and the system is the same because, again, I'm about transforming systems, and then those behaviors come up.
Okay.
Now, as far as individuals, I do have some men that I see. There are times that men have been in codependent relationships. Maybe they were the oldest and they were always the dependable one in their family. And then that starts to translate in some of their intimate relationships, either with their adult children or with their partner. And this sometimes, it shows up in some of the same-sex couples that I see and also in heterosexual couples. So those threads of dysfunctional relationships show up everywhere, but a large part of my practice right now are women and children who are survivors of domestic violence.
Okay. And for people who don't know, can you tell us what emotional abuse is?
Thanks. So emotional abuse can sometimes take the form of, it's really mind games, if we want to really simplify it. It's a way of relating to someone that is very exploitative. It is not direct or honest or loving or caring. It's usually very self-serving. It could be something as common as blaming someone else for their problems. If they tend to get angry and then go have a drink, you see what you made me do, you stress me out, this is the only way I can deal with you. Or even with the cycle of abuse, blaming the person who was physically assaulted. You see what you made me do, and then they, go through the cycle of apologizing. So it could be blaming, it could be criticizing, it could be name calling, it could be embarrassing in public, trying to control what they eat, what they wear, who they're around. There's often a lot of isolating behaviors, and sometimes they'll criticize other friends to kind of isolate you from that person. So it's mental, emotional, and then also playing on the feelings: betrayal, deceit, humiliation, injuries to the emotions.
Okay. Why is it important, from your perspective, to, work with and treat emotional abuse? Because on a national level, even on a state level, when you look at Child Protective Services or any law enforcement agency or any agency that's required to protect the people, emotional abuse is not really considered a component that which we need to protect people from. So from your perspective, why is this important? Why do we need to look at this?
That's exactly why it's important. And I'm trying to maintain my mindfulness because this is actually something I'm very passionate about. I work with a lot of families who are going through the family court system. And I want to briefly give a shout out to Tina Swifton. She is the writer of Divorcing a Narcissist and One Mom's Battle, and she has a wealth of resources related to some of the ways in which the legal system, the family court system that has been designed and set up to protect children first and foremost, but also the rights of parents, and how it's set up to actually breed into the toxic nature of these high conflict relationships and personalities. So it's important because emotional injuries aren't those that you see. If someone has been bruised and battered, most people would intervene, even a stranger. But the sinister nature of an emotional abuse is that you can't see it, and so it can often be explained away. Often there are those who are survivors who will try to make sense of it themselves, like maybe it was me, or maybe I overreacted, or maybe there's something I can do, because it often goes unnoticed. So what I do in trying to facilitate the care and protection, especially of children in these situations, is I encourage parents to observe their child almost from the outside. I let them know very, very, very directly and upfront that the court will not be concerned with your feelings. Your attorney may or may not, but that is not the court's job. They're looking at two people who used to love each other, or on some level have some kind of relationship, intimate relationship, and now they're mad. And so they cannot focus on he said, she said. But if you focus on explicit behavioral observations, how is this child now sleeping? Were they fully potty trained and now they're regressing and they're experiencing what you and I understand is enuresis, nighttime bedwetting, or daytime, or encopresis, soiling themselves? Have they lost language? Have they more increased startle response? And so these are the things that impair their functioning. And if it's impaired at school and at home and in other locations, then there could at least be cause for some type of investigation. As a mandated reporter, I'm not a mandated investigator. So it's not up to me to prove it, but it is for me to call attention to it if it is a reasonable suspicion that this child may be at risk. And so, unfortunately, emotional abuse gets put aside. So as far as a theoretical, personal, and philosophical reason why this is important, as a woman of faith, I believe that relationships are critical. We are best known in relationships. Sometimes you don't even know what issues you still have until you get into certain relationships. But at their best, they are places where we are known and we are knowing, and we are more of who we should, are authentically designed to be. So when you have those interpersonal injuries and you are wounded in your safe places, it undermines your sense of security and confidence and stability outside. So you may have a medical doctor who he is being verbally abused by his wife, who has borderline personality disorder. She rages, she takes him on guilt trips, she threatens to cut herself or even harm him, usually themselves, and he has to go to work and function in a high intensity level. And so it matters how we treat each other. And especially in communities of faith, I find people who they separate that. As long as they're okay with Allah or with God or Jesus, then they dismiss the way that they treat other people. And there are all kinds of philosophical ways why that may be. But abuse in any form is not to be tolerated or justified or normalized. And so that's why it's important. And we were made to be in relationships, and so those should be reciprocating relationships, which means we should both be built up, we should both be more authentic and honest. And so that's the value of addressing that issue.
Great. And who are the faces of our emotional abusers?
What do you mean?
Well,
like which types of relationships?
Which types of relationships and who can be emotionally abusive to us? There's a lot of people who are very dismissive of, someone being emotionally abusive because that's their parent or that's their friend or that's their pastor or boss. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that?
So emotional abuse shows up, and one of the things that often helps me in my work with my clients is we look at patterns across relationships. And sometimes once that thread gets run from this relationship to this, and we consider what's the same, we look at how they are either participating, not causing it, or provoking it, because abusers cause abuse, not those with whom they are aggressing. But it could be a boss. It could be a boss that has called you in to be a team player, but let's say they reprimand you in a way that is highly inappropriate, or you come to them with a way in which they did not take you through due process, and they do it in a way to humiliate you, but also to send a clear message to the other people on the team, that this is how we handle things, through control and manipulation. It could be a pastor. It could be any type of spiritual leader who feels that they focus more on what they want, and there's no consideration, there's no partnership, there's no dialogue. It can be a parent. A lot of times there are parents who, it's being a parent is a very scary thing. I've heard it said that, being a mom is like agreeing to have your heart walk around on the outside of you for the rest of your life. And so for a lot of people who have poor personal boundaries, low self-esteem, to have a child who's small can be very easy to manage, because I know where they are, I know what they're eating. I mean, they're really at my disposal almost, but really I'm in control. And a lot of ways that I can control them is because of my size and my power and the way in which I speak to them. But what I try to encourage adult children, and well, not just adult, but children, because it has to be developmentally appropriate, and parents, is to, once the power is gone, the power of differential is gone, what will you have? And if you had to work really hard and control to get that, what you consider love, there's always this underlying fear that you really don't have that love. And so part of it is working with them to say, okay, what else do you have? Or to help them with language. Sometimes they may say something like, you don't care about me. You don't come see me. And really what they would like to say is, I miss you, or I'm sad when you're not here, or I feel rejected when, you spend more time, at dad's house and not at my house. So it matters how we say what we say. And so it could be any of those relationships. It's not just an intimate partner who could be emotionally abusive. It could be a government official that is in a very mass and global way being emotionally abusive, and it stirs it up in societies around. It kind of sets a precedent.
And I really like the parent-child dynamic that you brought up, because a lot of the people that come to see me, and probably you, are mostly adult children of parents that are very emotionally abusive and say things in such a way that is so crass and degrading that, it causes a lot of friction and a lot of tension in that relationship. And it causes us to, we have this love and we have this, maybe this fear of our parent, but we don't have this respect, or we don't like our parent. And
we feel guilty about it.
Right. And we feel guilty about it. And it's more like we might, and I'm saying we, but I'm speaking for the folks that I see. How can they manage in these relationships in a way that's more beneficial and effective for them, and maintain self-preservation?
I'm glad you mentioned that, especially the self-preservation. The importance of emotional abuse is, and why it should be addressed, is just that. When you are injured in your most intimate relationships, where your guard is down, right? So if there's a faith leader or community healer and your guard is down, you're vulnerable. And so, and I hope I can remember this, but there's actually a psalm in the Bible that speaks to this, and I may reference that, but I'll go ahead and say it's Psalm 55. But when you are wounded in that way, those early relationships help you have a working model of who people are, who you are, how the world is, and also who the divine is. And so if something's wrong in this relationship with this person, that is reasonable to expect that I'm going to be valued and protected and mutually served, then it really can shake people at the core. So there are people who will start to believe this is who I am, and it opens the door for them to then be open and receptive to other people who are even more abusive or more overtly abusive. The thing about emotional abuse is it's very covert. It's often a person who can be very charming and very respectful in public, but then in private it's their families and their close relationships, or their like their people who they are managing on the job, or who see them as a leader in the church, who get the brunt of that. So one of the resources that I often direct people to is a book and a companion workbook called "Stop Walking on Eggshells."
Yes.
And I'm not always the best with the authors, but I promise if you look for "Stop Walking on Eggshells," you will find a series of works.
Yes.
One of which, one of the authors, she is a clinician, and she wrote about splitting, which is actually a book about what is it like when you're divorcing someone with borderline personality disorder, which is more the, the overt, raging. Getting into that will be too long. And then also a narcissistic personality disorder, which is what you specialize in. And so what we both do, but on different ends of that relationship. And it talks about one of the ways that people use emotional blackmail, and I've shared this in my communities this week on both my social media platforms. And they tend to use fear, obligation, and guilt. And so this type of emotional blackmail is very powerful manipulation.
Yes.
Because there's this threat, either directly or indirectly, and the indirect ones can be really cause a fog, right? It's very confusing. Like, what just happened? Did they just?
Yes.
And they use it to get us to do what they want. And so what happens is, if you use all of this power and coercion, then you always have in the back of your mind, do they really love me? And is this what it's going to take each time? And so it creates this vicious trap. So I often use bibliotherapy because it's a mindset shift that has to happen. When you are recovering, if you've been in a toxic relationship where there was some manipulation, some boundaries, and I've had people who were athletes and performers in the public arena, and their coaches or their trainers were abusive towards them emotionally. And it is to get them to control. And people who usually engage in that behavior themselves have low self-esteem, and that's what we miss, because they seem so powerful, so dominant, and they seem to have all the power in the relationship. So when I give resources to a client and they start to get that mindset, first of all, they see, wow, this is a pattern. This is a very prescriptive way of acting. And so if they're going to do this, then I know what to do to counter. And I'm able to decide to stay in the relationship. So one, having that mindset shift. Also opening up for support to other people, because there's often so much shame that you don't tell anyone. And especially if you're not really sure if it's abuse or if you're to blame. Because most of us, we are very caring, but then we become caretakers of this negative behavior. So education is key. It's not to go around and diagnose everyone, because as you said, and you just said earlier this week, that only about 2% of the population has, that particular narcissistic personality disorder proper. But there are traits that we all have, but they can become excessive. And so those tools can be helpful to have a healthy relationship in general.
Very much so. And just shifting gears a little bit in the interest of time and everything like that, you had a very interesting analogy in which you talked about how to recover after being in a relationship that is emotionally destructive.
Yes. So this model, has come out of a preaching opportunity that I had at a church in Maryland called Love AME Church, where for the entire month there was a directed ministry towards women, but to the entire community, sponsored by the Women's Ministry. And I preached on the Sunday that was Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And they actually had the title. The title was called #Reset, #Heal. And it was for survivors. And in studying and trying to be open about, what was the important message that might be helpful, encouraging, and informative, there were two things that came to mind. The first was, where the Bible says, if there is anyone in Christ, they're a new creation, right? And so there are people in my work, how I got into this was as a leader in the faith community, I'm seeing all these people suffering. So pain, we know, is inevitable, but they were suffering because of the language that they were telling themselves. And some of that came from their faith claims, and it kept them in this cycle of suffering. And so there are many who are in Christ, but they don't feel new. And so what does that mean to be new, and how does that happen? And so in that study, I saw Psalm 55, almost as if I had never seen it before, but apparently it's always been in there in the middle of the book. And it talks about the torment that the psalmist is talking about, the torment that they experience, having slander come their way. So that's the verbal abuse, and people who have these poor boundaries and are emotionally abusive, once you are away and they can't control you, they try to control what other people think of you. So
Yes.
There's these smear campaigns and slander, which is why you don't do much social media exchanges with them or let them have access. But it talks about the verbal abuse. It talks about ideas of thoughts of death by suicide because it's so overwhelming. And the key to the person's torment was that the perpetrator, it said, if it had been an enemy, I might be able to deal with that. But it was not my enemy. It was one like me, my companion. And it even goes on to say, one with whom I walked in the house of God. And it goes further to say, their words were so sweet, and we spent sweet fellowship together. So that is betrayal and an interpersonal injury in a very intimate relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why but it's right there in the Bible, Psalm 55. There are some places where the person is also in touch with their anger. Often when I work with survivors, that is the last thing they want to touch, because they don't want to be like the person that was abusive. So anger is a no-no. But anger is a human alarm that says there is a real or perceived injustice. There are even places in the Bible where it says, be angry. It's a command in that instance. Be angry and sin not. So the model that came up, the only thing when I kept thinking about their theme, reset, I was like, well, reset, I don't know. Now, I'm someone who loves my iPhone and probably too much at times. And so thought about the reset. And so I interviewed one of my good friends and colleagues' son, who is my go-to expert on anything Apple. And so I started to do some research online, and I couldn't understand enough about the types of resets if your phone is not functioning at its best or the way it was designed to do. And so I spoke with him, interviewed him, and he explained this to me, and this is how it aligns with this model for recovery. So first of all, this type of recovery is lifelong. Not that the levels of distress are going to be lifelong, but it is something to remain aware of. Mm-hmm. So automatically we know that's forgive and remember could be a part of that. We don't want to forget. We want to, reignite that sense, that gut that tells us that something's not okay, yes, which had been overridden in that relationship.
Yes.
So the first reality is, he said that there's a hard reset and then there's a factory reset. And I said, well, what about the soft reset? There is no soft reset. So that means as we start to move through recovering from emotional abuse, there will be pain. There will be discomfort. There will be times when you feel I'm not responding the right way, especially if you have to continue to relate to this person. They're your parent. Where are you going to go? They're your boss, or you have to co-parent with this
yes.
person, or you're a leader in a church. So sometimes you get pulled in and because they hook you. So there's no soft reset. That's something that we just have to come to terms with. Mm-hmm. The second is the hard reset. That is just you push two little buttons, and let's say if there's an app that keeps opening, you're trying to take a picture and it just glitches and it closes. That could be just a hard reset. It's almost like turning it off and on, but it's really you turn it off till you see a little Apple sign, and it's doing like a reboot that you might do for your computer.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't change the computer, doesn't change the phone, but it allows to function in a way that might be best. And that may be for someone who's early in the emotionally abusive relationship, and they're starting to see, and they get away and get some perspective. They may leave the house. They may reach out and start to talk to someone, because shame has been a big part of it. And a big piece that makes it very difficult is that you tend to cover for that person. And so you've covered for so long, and she seems like mother of the year. And now that you're starting to share about the abuse, you get mixed messages, which can be discouraging at all.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the heart reset. Those are the quick surface things. Then the next type of reset, there are 3 types of factory resets, which I did not know. The first reset is the settings. So that means when you reset the phone, all of your settings are going to be lost. So if I reset my phone and I'm in my office and I come home to my home office, it is not going to automatically recognize my Wi-Fi, even though I had initially given it access to my phone by putting in the password. That is when we are in these relationships and we have to examine our connections with what's going on within me that makes that easy for me to participate in. Is that my low self-esteem? Because a lot of times with us who are caring empaths who become caretakers, there's an unresolved pain even before. Not all the time. Not everyone who's a survivor of emotional abuse, but often there's a pain that was there even before that toxic relationship started. But if I can focus on their pain or the pain they're causing me, then I never have to address that.
Correct.
So what is it in me that needs to be addressed? Maybe it's my tendency to overdo, that sense of fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, fear of being seen as a bad person or a bad Christian or Muslim. Maybe it's obligation. They did something for me a long time ago. Maybe it's guilt. I take responsibility for globally. Any complaint anyone has, and I see that a lot in the men that I work with. They have a complaint, I must be wrong. So there's the settings reset. Then there's the content and settings reset. And most of us, let me go back. The network reset. The network reset means it may be something wrong with the connection of the tower, the AT&T, the Verizon, or whoever your server is. And so for that is the connection with the divine. It's going to take something higher than you and this person to move through this situation. So it could be a codependent recovery group. It could be the love that you have outside, just in general, for love's sake, and reclaiming that. It could be your relationship with God and your prayer life. Maybe you're afraid. Maybe you doubt your own worth and that this is as good as God is going to give you. So that's the network up and down. But there's also the people around us. An important piece, because there's been the silence and the shame, is a commitment to breaking the silence. Finding those safe people. Now, you can't just tell anybody, right? If someone's telling all their business, you definitely know when to tell this, because it's a very delicate situation. So you have to change that. You also have to be aware of the people around you that are saying, well, she's the mother of your children. You can deal with that. I mean, eventually the kids will be gone, then you can leave, Or people say, he's a good man. At least he has a job and 2 legs. You should just, girl, you better keep that man. Or it's been passed on for generations, so it's normalized. So you have to shift your network. Then the third type of factory reset is the one that we all fear the most. If I say, let's reset our phone, it is the content and the settings. That means it's going to erase everything, even that screenshot from 2005, which I don't even need anymore, right? And one of the pieces that was so key that he told me is that you back up the phone, then you do the content, and so you back it up means you save it somewhere else, everything that was on it. But then you do the reset of the content and the settings, and everything's off the phone, and it's back to the way it was originally out of the box. Right? That's not the newness that the Bible talks about, new in Christ. It's not to erase who we are, it's to redeem who we are. So that when something is put on it, it's something that is of benefit and is loving and lovable. So he said, sometimes it's the problem is what's in the backup. It's not just what's on the phone. So you may not want to restore because with the restore, so there's a reset, but then there's a restore. The restore, it's all or none. You either take what you have on that backup and put it back on the phone, or you put none of it. You can't pick and choose, especially on the back end. You can select at the beginning. And so we have to be mindful. What do I need to put in to be able to move forward? I need to have what my great grandmother calls get mad money. I have to have that because the financial abuse often have survivors stay longer than they really would. Okay, and so part of it is that network. If it's a woman, I always say, when was your last girls' night out? You need to have a good girls' night out. You need that support. You need somebody to be there. You need to speak up. And now I'm going to my notes, so I won't ramble. You need to rebuild your sense of discernment, those red flags that go off your gut, and you're trusting yourself. Because what happens is they experience a lot of anxiety. They could be a professional person, highly trained, highly educated, but they're always second guessing themselves. Because think about it, if I could be wrong about this most intimate thing that is right there, what else might I be wrong about?
Right.
And then mindfulness and relaxation, getting that stress and that, tension out, being able to, because it can affect you physiologically with high blood pressure and all kinds of problems with the tension. So that's where your spiritual disciplines come into place, because ultimately it's a matter of rebuilding your life so that you are enough. Your life becomes like tea. When I moved to California and I'd say I want sweet tea, they give me these little packets and it just upset me, annoy me. But the bottom line is that was still tea. Whether it has sugar in it or not, it's tea. And so our lives need to be enough, regardless of who's added to our lives.
There you go.
Knowing our rights legally, we have to know our rights. If there's something for, these are things that you want from you to add and put on instead of just the general backup. You want to know your legal rights. You want to know your parenting rights. You want to know what is the due process on your job. Are there any leaders in the church that this person is accountable to? A lot of the denominations don't have that type of accountability, but a lot of churches are now creating that among themselves.
Good, yeah.
And then I've already mentioned the Get Mad Money. The Get Mad Money is about financial literacy. Do you know what it takes to get out of debt? Do you know how to find out what's on your credit report? Because a lot of people who have these emotionally abusive behaviors and poor boundaries, they will go into the finances and they will open accounts or have other expenses in your name that you don't know about. So financial literacy, which brings financial liberty. If you need to get out, you will be able to get out. You're more likely to be able to get out because you have those financial resources. Now, you don't have to wait for that. And so I will say this now, that this moment is not about counseling. You and I both say this, that this is about education, entertainment, and really empowering people to live healthier lives. If they're actively engaged, they don't want to come back here to social media to buy my ebook or my webinar or my training or just listen to our podcast. They want to get into a supportive therapeutic environment. So that financial liberty also brings financial legacy, so that the generations behind you are empowered to do something differently. And it doesn't call forgiveness, instead of holding on to that and chaining that person and taking you into the next relationship. Sometimes, you may be the only person praying for the person that abused you, but sometimes you don't like them and you may ask someone else to pray for them. Knowing what the word says about you or reading your Quran, whatever those things that root you and ground you, and learning how to say no. There's another book, it's a faith-based, Boundaries, When to Say Yes and How to Say No. Correct. Invaluable book.
Good book.
Because we think we should say yes to everything, and we really should.
Love it. And I think that was great. And I'll definitely make sure that I put all those resources that you mentioned in the show notes. So just tell me, Vanessa, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. Do you have any more resources for people that have experienced emotional abuse. They're trying to heal, they're trying to find freedom, or maybe they are trying to find a way to coexist in a relationship which is necessary, but they know is still going to remain abusive.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. I want to make sure I didn't read any of this. Well, first part is the education. You have to know what you're dealing with. It often helps if you get some information, because then you can start to see the patterns. And all the good literature talks about the fact that that person doesn't have 100% control of the relationship. Let's say they make a demand and you want to say no, so they threaten or they pressure, and then you comply. Mm-hmm. Well, there's a 50-50 part of participation in that. You can, with support and education and practice, because it takes practice. These are interpersonal skills. You practice honoring your no, which, so some of the books I've already referenced. Yes. There are resource centers, like in Greensboro, we have the Women's Resource Center. Nice. They actually have opportunities for you to consult with an attorney for free for 15 minutes.
Yes.
Most of those community agencies, if you Google domestic violence and ask around, education, community support, really exploring the self, which can be very scary. Because if I make everything about them or running away to a different place, then I don't have to accept the changes that I might need to make.
Correct.
And sometimes they're very practical. Like, if I leave, who's going to pick up the kids? If I leave, who's going to run the choir? If I leave, who's going to run the church, right? Yes. Or what's going to happen to this business? Yes. But being able to draw those healthy boundary lines around ourselves. So,
okay,
there's a lot there, I don't know. But having that support and that accountability matters too.
That sounds great. And then, how can people reach you if they want to connect with you and get more of that wholesome, good advice and guidance that you're giving out?
Oh, well, thank you. So I am on Instagram and Facebook at V Abernathy Psyd. So that's VAbernathyPsyd. And I'm also my website. There's a landing page there, and the website is being built out with some of these resources digitally for people who may be remote, who may never come into my office, who may want to give something to someone else. And that is theabernathypsyd.org. Okay,
great.
Same handle everywhere, even Twitter.
Okay, great. And I'll make sure to put those in the show notes as well. And I'm so happy that you came on and told people about this stuff. It's very enlightening and just comforting to know that there's some people out there like you who are so passionate about this and are a serious advocate for this in more ways than one, the spiritual and the whole mind, body, just holistic practice of wanting people to heal and help them and to move on and move through the pain. And so I appreciate you very much for coming on and talking with us about that.
Thank you so much. So honored. This has been a gift to me, and I trust that this new connection and collaboration and relationship will be the gift that keeps on giving.
There you go.
All right. Our community can expect more from us.
There you go. I love it. Thank you so much, Dr. Abernathy.